Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon to you, Kymyona, beaming into us from Mississippi. Are you in Jackson, Mississippi?
I am in a community right outside of Jackson called Byram, Mississippi. So that's where I am today.
Amazing. I'm literally I don't know exactly where that is just outside of Jackson, but as you know, I had an incredible visit and experienced true Mississippi hospitality last year, which is something very, very dear to my heart and I will always treasure. Thank you so much for taking time on your Sunday afternoon to join me and really, really looking forward to hearing about what you do in your role and what you've done in your previous roles to influence literacy instruction, both in the state of Mississippi, but now really, really further afield across multiple states in the United States. So let me take a minute to introduce you to our listeners here in New Zealand and further afield. Kymyona Burk is a Senior Policy Fellow at Excel and Ed. In this role, she supports states pursuing a comprehensive approach to K to 3, kindergarten to third grade, reading policy by assisting state leaders in building new or improving existing reading policies, with a heavy focus on supporting successful policy implementation. Dr. Burke also serves as a visiting senior fellow at the Science of Reading Centre at SUNY New Paltz. Am I saying that right?
SUNY. It's the State University
SUNY.
of New York, yes.
Great. In this role, she helps lead strategic planning and implementation for the centre's ongoing expansion as a professional learning support resource for pre-K to 12 educators right across the United States. Dr. Burke has a demonstrated history of building teacher capacity and improving student literacy outcomes across a career in teaching, coaching, and state level administration, spanning more than 25 years. She most recently served in Mississippi as the executive director for the Jackson Public Schools District Office of Teaching and Learning and led all aspects of the district's instructional programming. Prior to this, she was the state literacy director at Mississippi's Department of Education, leading the state level implementation of the Literacy Based Promotion Act in 2013. This aimed to ensure that all students were proficient readers by third grade. And under this literacy leadership of Dr. Kymyona Burks from 2013 to 2019, Mississippi's fourth graders increased 10 scale score points in reading on the National Assessment of Educational Progress, improving from 50th state to the 29th state in the nation. I just have to go like this because I know how incredible that is. Congratulations. That is
Thank you
just
so much.
amazing. Dr. Burke began her career as an elementary reading teacher and also has taught middle and high school English. At Jackson University, she earned a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science, Master of Arts in Teaching English, and a Master of Science in Education Administration and Supervision, and a Doctor of Education in Early Childhood Education. A very, very big welcome again, Kymyona, to this chit chat. Shall we begin by you telling us a little bit about your work in Mississippi and what you did? As you probably know, we have the term the Mississippi Miracle, even though there's no real true silver bullet, is a very well coined phrase that even we know here in New Zealand. So I'd love it if you could just begin by telling us about your role and really, really shifting the dial in literacy education in Mississippi.
Well, good morning to you, and good afternoon for those of you who may be watching in the States. Thank you so much for having me today to talk about just this transformation of how we teach reading, how we approach the type of support that's being offered to our teachers in classrooms in order for them to be able to improve their practice. So I will start by saying that in 2013, Mississippi passed a literacy law under our governor at the time, Phil Bryant. And the literacy law was to ensure that our students were becoming skilled readers by the end of third grade. We wanted to make sure that we weren't socially promoting students, promoting students to the next grade without having those needed skills, because the research says that students transition from learning to read, with kindergarten through third grade, to actually reading to learn, from third grade and beyond. So this was our first state-led, statewide
Mm.
effort. And I was chosen to be the state literacy director and to lead the implementation of this policy. It was unique in that, as you mentioned, I had been a teacher in a classroom. I also was served as a literacy coach and worked at a university level. But to be able to represent the state agency in leading this effort, I'll always say, like, this to me has been one of the most impactful
Mm.
opportunities of my life. Yes.
I bet. You must be so proud, and you must have learned so much throughout that process.
Yes, yes, we learned a lot through the process. It took a team of us. I know there are several of us who are, doing the interviews, but I'll tell you that there were so many, our literacy coaches, those who were on the ground supporting teachers, who really made this effort what it has become.
Mm. What sort of personnel structure did you have in place? Once that literacy law was passed and things started to move forward, what was the personnel structure that you had in place to support teachers in schools to be able to teach in a way that was going to ensure you achieve the outcomes you'd set out to achieve?
Well, I'll tell you this. What's so interesting about that is that the State Department of Education really did not have the infrastructure needed when this law passed to be able to provide the support and do all of the things that the law was asking us to do. We did not have a
Mm-hmm.
Department of Early Childhood Education at our Department of Education. It was just, an umbrella of elementary education and reading. So with my office, the literacy office was first created under that. And within that office, we hired literacy coaches to be able to support teachers. Within the first, I'll say, semester, from maybe that August until December, we did so many things. We adopted a professional development system that we knew our teachers would need in order to build their knowledge. We knew that we had to have a common language for what it
Mm.
meant to teach reading. There was language in the law around providing intensive interventions. We didn't have
Mm-hmm.
anyone at the department that could answer questions about what intensive interventions were, how we would address our students with dyslexia, uh, how we would address our English learners. We did not have the infrastructure for any of those things. So within the
Wow.
first
Yeah.
2 years, our state superintendent at the time, Dr. Carrie Wright, created the infrastructure for us to truly be able to respond to those who were on the ground and in classrooms.
Mm-hmm. So there was a law passed. You then went into building a team in your Department of Education. The
Yes.
language in the law required you to have an infrastructure, for example, the literacy coaches, the adapted professional development system, intervention processes, and being able to cater to English as second language. But you were saying that you didn't necessarily know what that was going to look like, or you didn't have the people who were potentially qualified
Yes.
to move into those particular roles. So, what next, Kymyona? Because I know when I visited Mississippi last year, I know these things are there now. So,
Yes.
because I met people in
Yes.
different roles. So, what happened from there to how did you go about building up that team and ensuring that people were suitably, dare I say, qualified and developing the expertise to be able to make a difference in those roles?
Yeah, I mean, so now we have people visiting from all across the world, as you mentioned, coming to our classrooms, and it looks like it's just this well-oiled machine that has been
Mm-hmm.
running forever. But that
Mm-hmm.
definitely wasn't the case when we started out. The original goal, and it was in our newspaper here for the state, a really popular newspaper, that the department was set to hire 75 literacy coaches to go into classrooms, and the department hired 22, plus me and my assistant director, Dr. Tanette Smith. So there were 24 people hired from that effort. And it
Gosh.
was because we did not have the capacity, right, from our pool of educators, for those to be able to serve as coaches. You know, the one thing that you have
Mhm.
to have, there are two things you have to be coaches. You have to know how to teach reading, right? You have to have
Mm.
that experience in teaching reading well and getting results with your students. But you also have to be able to work well with adults, because with
Yeah.
coaching, of course, you have to build these relationships. So when we first started, because we had never had a statewide professional development system to get us all on the same page about teaching reading, we just lacked the people with the capacity to be able to do it.
Mm.
So over
Mm.
time, as we began our implementation of our professional development system, and we did that within the first year. Like I said, the first 4 months was identifying a system. We started immediately in that January following that, by providing professional development to the field. So we built knowledge. That's where we
Mm.
started. We had to treat it as a blank slate. We have 15 public and private universities here in Mississippi, and each one may teach its candidates how to teach reading a completely different way. So we
Mm.
had to level
Mm.
set. You know, we had to level set for the
Mm.
state that we're going to support and implement this law based on the science of reading, and that language is actually included in our policy. So as we
Mhm.
begin to build capacity, we begin to get, of course, more qualified candidates to be coaches, more qualified
Mm.
pool of people that we could pull from to fill these staffing positions that were being created at the department. So that's what it was. We you know, I know you've heard of the phrase "building the plane as we're flying it," and we
It's very well
um,
versed in that one.
and we were doing that at the beginning,
Mm.
with help from a lot of partners as well. But it was truly a collective effort to get
Mm.
us to where we are today, for sure.
Mm. Yeah, wow. It's actually really quite it's really quite good to hear you say that, because that's sort of where we are here now in New Zealand. And one of the things for us is that it actually causes a lot of angst. And I'm
Mhm.
sure for you in your role, but also for the teachers, it causes angst,
Yes.
because if you take away, for example, an intervention that has previously been implemented, and then there's this giant gaping hole, and now there's nothing, and what's going to happen, which is a little bit sort of where we're at here in New Zealand at the
Mhm.
moment. We're at that place where I think an infrastructure is sort of being built, perhaps seemingly behind the scenes. So it's really quite reassuring to hear that is the process, and that was your experience as
Yes.
well. When you think about particular policies and practices that were put in place, can you talk to anything that you think is really important in terms of policies and practices to really bed this implementation down to ensure that it was long standing?
Yeah. So, you know, I mentioned professional development. I went into that. Um, in addition to teachers, make sure that your administrators, your school leaders, are
Mm.
also getting this knowledge, because they're going to be the ones really to hold teachers accountable for changing their instructional practice in school. So they have to also be knowledgeable of what this type of instruction should look like, right, in the classrooms as they go to observe and to visit classrooms.
Mm.
So building knowledge, of course, was one thing, but universal screeners or screening for characteristics of dyslexia
Mm.
is also critically important, because we can't start with all children on day one on page one, right? We know that our children are going to have differing needs, but how do we even find that out? So,
Mm.
universal screening was a practice that should have been in place consistently across the
Mhm.
state, but we found out that it wasn't, right? And so,
Mm.
with this law, it is specific in saying that students must be screened at least 3 times per year for reading difficulties, but also they must be screened for characteristics of dyslexia at the end of kindergarten and the beginning of first grade, which are ages
Mhm.
5 and 6, to identify that, any students who may be struggling with learning differences. So being able to first identify students early, um, in order to give them what they need, is critically important. But in order to do that, our teachers and administrators had to have the knowledge, right? So I get a lot of questions about what do we do first, right? Everything.
Yeah.
You can't
Yeah.
do everything first, but honestly, build knowledge and then make sure
Mm,
you're identifying students early. The other thing is curriculum. We chatted a little bit earlier about the differences in between
yeah.
the United States and New Zealand. In the United States, we have 50 states plus DC, and each state, it usually has another layer of local control at the school districts where you can have several districts within a state all using different types of curriculum, right? Uh,
Mm, mm,
so one of our goals was also then to ensure that we were providing that guidance from the state level to school districts about the best curricula that they can choose.
mm.
Um, and with that, I think that now a lot of the conversation has been centered around education at a deficit, right? Which students are struggling readers? How do we approach that? And a little attention is now being paid to what should happen at core instruction for
Yeah.
all kids and how that needs to be strengthened so that we can
Mhm,
reduce the number of students who need interventions, right?
mhm,
So having
mhm.
those conversations and really shifting that mindset to we want to strengthen our core instruction and identify those students who need additional help so that we can help them. So I talked about the professional development, building the knowledge, identifying students early so that they can get what they need, and having the right materials, right? So that teachers can
Mm,
make sure that students not only understand the foundational knowledge of how to read, but also that they're exposed to rich content and building their
mm,
knowledge as well.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Just to clarify for those people listening, so when we talk about curriculum here in New Zealand, we're probably talking about what Kymyona talks about if she were to talk about standards. So
Mm,
we have expectations. Our curriculum, as I mentioned to you, has just been updated. When you talk about curriculum, you're actually talking about off what I'm going to term off the shelf teaching materials that
yes.
teachers use to teach to ensure that students reach the standard, the year level or grade level standards.
Correct. That is correct.
Yeah.
Each state adopts its own standards. And so we have our overall standards, and then our school districts are able to choose the teacher materials that align to those standards. And of course, as you know, there are a lot of off the shelf materials out there. Our
Yeah.
goal is to, of course, strengthen their knowledge about which curricula or which
Mm,
materials are the right ones and which ones can be
mm,
most effective in reaching most kids. Yes.
mm. I remember when I was visiting the team in the Brandon district, and we'd been out to visit schools, and then we came back to their offices, and I was working or being hosted that day by Dr. Melissa McRae, and she
Yeah.
took me back into her office, and she had all these what you call curriculum materials. And she's like, so this one, and then she's telling me all about them and what she was thinking, because she was going to be making the decision as to um, what curriculum materials they would be using. So it's really quite fascinating for us to hear about how those different ways of implementation, pan out.
Yeah.
Um, Another question I have for you, Kymyona, is around the professional development, and how did you approach that? Because one of the things that I wonder about here in New Zealand is at the moment we are in the throes of our Ministry of Education have provided funding for professional development to reach all teachers
Mm,
um, in grades like grade 1 to grade 7, I think would be the equivalent. Um,
mhm,
but it's a short burst of professional development. And I'm interested to know whether or not you took sort of a long or a marathon approach to implementing professional development, or yeah, how you did that to ensure that teachers really did have that knowledge bedded down and the opportunity to continue to grow that knowledge as they needed to.
Yeah, so with our professional development system, we couldn't train everyone at the same time. That just was not possible. We have maybe now 139 or so school districts here with teachers, in different grade levels, different configurations as it relates to our early literacy, K3, K5, and all of those things. So our rollout plan, our implementation plan for providing professional development to teachers was extremely important. We first identified our schools that had the most students who were scoring below proficient, and those
Mm-hmm.
teachers and administrators were our priority. In our first year of the rollout, those lowest performing schools, their educators were our priority. And beginning second year, we beginning to then have this tiered approach to now we'll have our next level of schools and their educators um, to attend professional development. So the key, though, I talked about coaching earlier, is not just this statewide approach to providing access to training. It's what happens when teachers then go back to their schools and go
Yeah.
back into their classrooms. And,
Mm.
when we invest in literacy coaches and those coaches being able to be in those schools working alongside teachers to say, yes, this is the phonics routine. That's something you learned about in professional development. Now let's try it out on kids, like let's try it with your students. And then the coach is there to help them if they need it, right? To give them feedback on how to improve their strategies or to help them to analyze the data that comes from their assessments. So the coaching piece was really the glue for us. In addition to the professional development, those teachers needed that kind of support on the ground. But it also helped us to monitor the progress. I'll talk about all these different pieces, but to be the state director, if I was just sitting in my office saying we've passed this law, we've given guidance, and we just hope that it's happening in school. you know, our literacy coaches being on the ground was really an avenue for us to help monitor, right,
Mm.
what's happening and to help troubleshoot when there were questions, to also support those districts that had not necessarily had processes in place to get those processes in place, right? Here's the window
Mm.
for screening, or this is when you have time to schedule for the reading block. So a lot of things went into coaching, not just coaches sitting in classrooms and helping,
Yeah.
but also helping them with the culture of the school, the structure of the school day, and what should happen within that structure.
Mm. It's so exciting, isn't it? Because until my experience has been in working alongside schools for a number of years in a coach kind of capacity has been that that's when the magic happens. That's
Yes.
when the magic happens, and the dialogue with the teachers in the moment reflection with the teachers sparks their enthusiasm, but their self belief and their knowledge and their practice that they could do something a little bit differently that would ultimately make a big shift. So, yeah, that's really exciting. You talked
Mhm.
about the allocation of professional learning and development and how you sort of did that. I'm going to say staged rollout was down to it sounded like it was down to data that you had access to. So you obviously know where schools and school districts are sitting in terms of achievement data. Is that correct?
Yes. So our state assessment data that is taken, now regardless of your school district, regardless of what curriculum you chose, we have one state assessment that is given, of course, for each of our grade levels, beginning in third grade in English and math. We call it English Language Arts, or ELA, in math. Also, there are for fifth grade and eighth grade science. And then we have some end of course assessments for high school. But regardless of where you are, all third graders will take the same assessment. And so we look at that data and look at an average of 2 years of data and identify those schools, again, that have the highest percentage of students below proficient. And that's how we're able to rank order really our schools for those that need the most support, to those, of course, that need the least support. And that is, probably seems like an antiquated. I mean, we have this Excel sheet, with the data, in the different levels of and percentages of students who are scoring in those levels, and we rank order by schools, and that's where we identify who needs the most support.
It's a real contentious subject here in New Zealand, the gathering of data at national level and what happens to that data and the privacy around that data. But one of the things that we do is we want the support, we want the professional learning, we want the interventions to be in place. And I always come back to, when you're talking that through, I say, well, your class is all of those schools, and you need to know what the diagnostics are of all of those schools to be able to then intervene and provide support accordingly. So it's going to be interesting here in New Zealand, and I look forward to, how we can, in our infrastructure, build a model that really sees us getting support to those schools that really, really need that support, because I'm not sure how we're going to sort out the inequities if we don't approach it that way. So
Exactly.
I think it's interesting, and isn't it? Because for both of us, we probably through this chat we go, yeah, like that is something, and I get a little bit goosebumpy, Kymyona, because I think we have to and we can reach everybody in this process, and we have to have a strong sense of moral purpose around that. So, can you just talk to us a little bit about, in terms of changing the equity situation or the access to education for all children, and really honing in on that? What's your experience been, and what are some real key drivers that you have in your various roles instigated
Yeah.
to ensure that education is equitable?
Well, I'll say this: change is hard. I think we start with that. Change is hard, but change is necessary. And I think that the Mississippi story is one that has really kind of captured the nation, and others across the globe, actually, because
Yeah.
we are the the poorest state in the nation. I mean, there's no question about that. We're the poorest state in the nation, most under-resourced area. We have maybe about 50% or so, 52% or so of our K-12 population are African American students. Some of our school districts are 100% free and reduced lunch. And the update on our on our NAEP ranking is that now we're ninth in the nation.
I know.
And our African American students are ranked third in the nation in reading and math when compared to their counterparts. Hispanic and free and reduced lunch students are ranked first in the nation when compared, right, to their subgroups. So I think, again, what's captivating is that, if it can happen here, right, then it can happen in other places. But you have to be very intentional, and you have to be targeted.
Yeah.
And that's the difference between when you're talking about the equality versus the equity. There are some schools that need more than others. I mean, it is just a fact. So the goal is, for us, it was policy. That was our lever. We had a state law that said, regardless of a child being in the poorest area in what we call the Delta in Mississippi, or in being in one of our higher resource areas on our Gulf Coast, each child had the right to have access to a child who knows how to teach him or her how to read. That's it. That's the floor. You have access to that. Your parents have to be notified. So we have parental notification. That's also a part of our law, that after students are
Mhm.
screened within 30 days, parents have to be notified if their children have a reading difficulty. The schools have to share how they are going to approach remedying that, and also give
Mhm.
parents resources and support as to how they can support students at home. So our policy is, we call it a comprehensive approach, because it not only supports our educators, it also supports our parents and families, and of
Mm.
course, with our students at the center. So for equity, for us, it was first taking away the socioeconomic status and saying, regardless, all districts
Mhm.
must do these things. All districts must screen students. All districts must provide interventions. All districts must, So it was the policy that really gave us this kind of credibility, that what we are attempting to do here in the state is what's going to be what's best for all children, not for some children. And we had to message it that way as well.
Mm. It's incredible. I'm very rarely speechless like that, but I sit and I listen to you, and it's just so heartwarming. And when you talk about the educators, but you talk about the parents and the families, or as we say here in New Zealand, the whānau, and bringing those stakeholders in, that that is that is just crucial
Yeah.
to it is crucial
Yeah.
to bringing them on board, having them feel valued and part of this. And also, because you must find too that there is, once parents know, you can't do anything about what you don't know about because you're not
Yeah.
qualified or you don't know how to look for it, right? So I imagine that that's really started to improve engagement and literacy across all ages and different members across that family. Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, during our first year, we realized that one of our strengths was being able to communicate to the different
Mhm.
stakeholders, right, where they are in this law. How do you see yourself in this process?
Mm,
And
mm,
we started having regional parent meetings. And so the second semester, the first year, we hosted 8 regional parent meetings across the state. Now, the difference in Mississippi is that if we start in central Mississippi in Jackson, it probably takes us 3 hours, 3.5 at the most, each direction, north, south, east,
mm.
west, where we can cover, right, the state within
Yeah.
those 3.5 hours. And so I remember my assistant director at the time and I went to, we attended all 8, right? We hosted all 8 from the State Department level, and we had district administrators and teachers to come, and it was for parents to help them understand the law. My daughter was in the first cohort of students who would be impacted by it, and so I was very interested in making sure that parents understood what this meant for their students. And we went to Delta State University. Again, that's in our Delta area, one of our poorest
Mm,
areas.
mhm.
And the school district actually took a school bus to the communities to pick up parents, because so
Oh,
many
wow.
of them were without transportation. It's one of our
Mm,
poorest areas in the country. So many of them were without transportation. The school district took a school bus to go pick up parents so that they could come to the meeting. Of course, we provided, food for them, and for the,
mm,
some parents, multiple kids, all of those things, provided snacks for them, and talked to them about the law. Even did some strategies with them on, like, these are some things of how we're teaching your children how to read. You should be expecting a report from screening, right? Look for
mhm,
that within the next 30 days.
mhm,
You should be
mhm,
expecting this. So really empowering parents to know, not only, these are some things that you can do, but really also holding the schools and school district accountable, that you
mm,
have to screen these kids because parents are going to be looking for these reports.
mm,
Um, so that's the type of intentionality,
mm,
that's the
mm,
type of targeted support. You can't make excuses and say, well, a lot of parents don't have transportation, so we may as well not host in that area. No. How do we get the parents there and how do we take accountability and responsibility for that. So that's
Mm.
just one example of some of the ways that we wanted to intentionally talk to and target different stakeholder groups, also with the messaging around that.
Mm. Amazing. Your word intentionality has really sat with me, and I think I've written it down 5 times
Yes. Yeah.
in my book because, yeah, it's definitely, and I think the other key thing for me that I'm taking away so far is just what are the pillars, that we really need to think about in terms of our implementation here in New Zealand. And there have been lots of really key strategic pillars potentially that you've given us. Like you've talked about, you call them administrators, we would call them more school leaders, but
Mhm.
um, the role of a school leader in terms of, or the importance of them intentionally building their knowledge, but then ensuring that the support is in place to support teachers on the ground once they come back into their school to be able to implement and have that ongoing development. You talked about the curriculum materials or the resourcing. You also talked about core instruction, and I'm
Mhm.
really excited to share with you that that's where we've started in terms of our rollout of professional learning and development here in New Zealand is in increasing the knowledge and practice of our teachers in core instruction,
Yes.
or that universal tier one instruction. So I think that's pretty exciting in terms of our implementation here. As we come to sort of rounding up our chat today, do you have any particular tips, for us in terms of creating the system-wide lasting changes that obviously, you've worked very, very strategically to implement at Mississippi? And I think I mentioned this to you when we last chatted, Kymyona, but I had some time with some of your potential colleagues at the Department of Education when I was in Mississippi, and
Mhm.
the passion
Yes.
and the rigor, like I could have sat in that room with them forever
Yeah.
and listened to. It's just incredibly inspiring. But one thing that Kelly did share with me was that, Carla, this is not done yet. This will
That's
never be
right.
done. It will never be done. We need to ensure that we are circling back and we are checking all the way that we have this in place, which I think is really important for us to know that this is not a one and done,
That's
that
right.
we have some continuous work to do. So, what would you say are sort of, 2 to 3 key tips that we might consider as we move towards a nationwide, which is probably state equivalent,
Mhm.
system wide lasting change here in Aotearoa, New Zealand?
Okay, so 3 things. The first thing I would say, and I've said multiple times, is invest in teacher knowledge, right?
Mhm.
Invest in teacher and school leader. Invest in the knowledge of those who are standing in front of children every day, so that they can feel empowered and so that they are equipped when students have these diverse needs, right, to be able to respond to them. So invest in knowledge. Plan for sustainability. Right.
Mm.
As you mentioned, none of this is a one and done. Plan for sustainability. If there's this boost of funding, right, to get you started, then what happens when the funding begins to decrease? How can you begin to plan for sustainability, that this becomes a part of the culture, that professional learning through, like, we call them professional learning communities, right, through POCs, that after you've done
Mhm.
your professional development, like your kind of formal professional development, how does your school continue with the professional learning communities where you have teachers who are modeling these strategies that are really working in their classrooms with their students, or you have other things, you're talking about data analysis, right, through those professional learning communities. So plan for sustainability. And I think the last thing would be anticipate uh, moments that you will have to course correct,
Mm.
Anticipate course correction. You're not going to get everything right this first time around, but when you realize that there's something that may not be working, be ready to course correct. For us,
Mm.
just one quick example, we have what's called an individual reading plan here at the state. And this is for students who are identified as having reading difficulties. But we also have our multi tiered system of support documentation packet where the teachers have to document I've provided these interventions. These are working, these are not. This is how I'm going to monitor and all of that. But guess what? The individual reading plan had a lot of those similar components that teachers had to complete. Something that was probably different was which curriculum are you using? If it's not fully aligned to the science of reading, what supplemental materials? But really, those the documentation pieces of were very similar. So our teachers started saying, "Well, why am I completing two documents that are almost similar? We really don't have time to do all of that." So because we, at that stage had an Office of Intervention Services, my team worked with their office to then create kind of just another page of that entire MTSS packet so that they could satisfy both MTSS and
Mm.
the individual reading plan.
Mm.
Because
Brilliant.
you have to think about the user, right? These
Yeah.
things may sound great in our mind of how we want to do it, but it impacts real people. And those are the ones who are using it. So you have to listen to them. And when it's not working for them, then just be open to the course correction. And
Yeah.
and I'll just kind of sum up my point to say, listen, you know, um, what has grabbed the attention again of the nation and others around the globe is kind of our rankings, right? How we have improved over this last decade. But the one thing that we know is that what we've done, these are life changing solutions.
Mm.
These are life changing. This has changed the trajectory of children's lives, being intentional about how to teach them how to read, how to navigate the world. I go through all of these airports and all of that, and I'm looking and gates changing, and you're getting all, and I'm like, gosh, if there's someone who's struggling to read, how do they even navigate the world?
Mm.
So what we have been able to do here has again changed what is going to be the quality of life, how children, who grow up to be adults, how they are able to provide for their families, how they're able to contribute to our society, our democracy, our economy. And
Mm.
so, for that, that's the excitement, that's the passion, that's we're never done. This success, the chairman of the organization I work for always says success is never final,
Mm.
and for us, we know
Mm.
that, and we are just committed to not only, supporting and changing the lives of children in Mississippi, but really everywhere. That's why I'm just so excited that you've even invited me to be a part of this conversation,
Mm.
and to also come to New Zealand this summer. So thank you.
Mm. Amazing to chat with you. I think you should tell us a little bit about the fact that you are going to come to New Zealand. And yeah, so tell us what you're doing and coming to our winter from your summer.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I'm excited. I'm excited to come to New Zealand. This will be my first time, of course, to really kind of talk about what we talked about today, what we've done in Mississippi, but also share, some additional insights. I'd love to be able to just talk to the audience. It's, always interesting for me, to not only talk about our story and kind of how we did it, but to hear what people care about, right? What others care about. A teacher's role, their questions may be completely different, something that I didn't say in my talk, right? So to really get at what the audience wants to know and how they can help. So I'm excited about that. Offering the keynote, I believe in a session as well,
Mm.
so that I can really kind of get to know the landscape and be able to provide as much support as I can.
Yeah. That's amazing. Thank you so much, Dr. Kymyona Burk. We are so excited. When I heard you speak at the Reading League conference
Mhm.
last year, you just, I just was in awe of. everything you were saying. And so the way you approach sharing information is so compassionate, it's so empathetic, and it really felt like you were shining a torch, but you weren't just walking that pathway on your own. You were kind of bringing everybody with you. And yeah, it was an incredibly inspiring and motivating workshop that I attended. And then, of course, having the privilege to see your work, which I didn't know at the time because I hadn't yet made all of those connections
Mm,
because I went to Mississippi as my next stop. So it was really, really incredible. So we are super excited to host you in August.
thank you.
For the Cultivating the Literacy Landscape Symposium across the 2 days this year. We normally just have one day, but we've decided to
Mm,
go to the 2 days to really be in that space for that little bit longer, and to really be able to spend some time with you listening and learning more about your experience and the influence you've had in Mississippi. So thank you so much for joining us today.
thank
It's
you.
been an absolute privilege to connect with you.
Thank you so much for having me.